I'm laying in bed. And I wanted to let you know that Rudy came here with a bunch of flowers. Wasn't he sweet?
Yes. Oh, there we go. Full screen.
Okay.
I hope I didn't give him COVID if I have it. Oh dear.
Aiko, we're being recorded.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm just starting out to talk about this guy. He really seems inspirational. You might look up his statement to the court, where he says, among other things, that he's surprised by the contempt and the secrecy of the current Russian leaders, and it reminds him of the trials of dissidents, but it's worse even than the 60s and 70s. It goes back to Stalin's purges in the 1930s. So there's that. And then when I finished last week, I threw up this slide. And this turned out to be a big deal. So this has kind of moved me along to continue to talk about water, which is the history of the last 150 years of California, ever since the Americans arrived. It's a huge part of the American part of California history. But now it looks like we've reached a critical point, and there's unprecedented things being said now about sharing water from the Colorado, and for the first time, the federal government is ready to impose reductions in the water supplies to the states. That's new. So just a quick review: Colorado, 7 states, as well as 2 states in Mexico. We forget Mexican states rely on the Colorado, and we learned that when last time or the time before we talked about Alarcon, who was the first Spaniard to go up the Gulf of Mexico, or the Sea of Cortez. He was sent by Cortez. He was supposed to coordinate with Coronado and resupply him, but they never met up. So he just sailed up the Colorado River. And so we can see how the Colorado River comes down between 2 parts of Mexico, the Baja and the mainland. And there are a couple of states that rely on Colorado water. It's not just America. You know, with this sudden deluge of water, there are people saying, oh, no big deal, we're saved. But all the important people are saying, don't take that as gospel. Well, it's just gonna we're in the middle of a 20-year, 23-year, maybe 100-year. I think David Pepper mentioned even about every longer than that, and that this rainfall, where we're getting 150% of the spring usual spring runoff to Lake Powell and Lake Mead. It's great. It's a godsend, but we can't plan on it, and we've got to keep going. This is probably just temporary relief. This summer, before the rains came, the Interior Department, quote unquote, dropped a bomb and declared an emergency, that this is an emergency. And we've certainly seen it in the Central Valley, the emergency of the water loss, and in Lake Shasta. And the federal government is saying 1/3 of Colorado's annual flow has to be saved to get to a safe level, and that we've got to cut consumption until we reach that 1/3 reduction. And so, you know, just like Lake Shasta, Lake Mead on the Colorado had the bathtub ring. And you look at the capacity, Lake Mead's 28%, Lake Powell's even worse at 23%. And what's concerning is the water intake towers have declined to the lowest level since it was filled. So the first disaster will be that there won't be enough water to turn the power turbines. And then the second thing is that it'll continue to drop until there's not enough water to get over the spillway. And that's what they call dead pool, unable to reach any intake valve. Dead pool. Essentially, the river stops moving. And so that's what the Department of Interior was looking at, the chance of dead pool. And so up until now, the federal government has said, okay, let's pay farmers not to use water, cities to cut down, native tribes to voluntarily. But all those efforts are insufficient. So they declared this emergency, that they were going to unilaterally impose a solution that's never occurred in American history. So we'll see if in this political environment that's even possible. Just to review, what does that mean? So there's 7 states, right? 4 of them, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, they have a direct border on the Colorado River that's not dependent on the dam. So they don't have to follow the federal jurisdiction doesn't really cover them. The feds can't force them to do anything. But the 3 states that benefit from federal dams, Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado, we're under their jurisdiction. And we've looked at this map before when we were doing the Salton Sea. And there's some interesting details here. You can see the California aqueduct. I want to talk a lot about that today. You can see the California aqueduct comes down and connects with the other water systems. The Los Angeles aqueduct that goes up to Owens Valley, Chinatown story. It comes down here, and then you get the metropolitan water districts, which are important in this story. So drop the bomb emergency and instructed the states to come up with a plan. So direct negotiations failed. 6 of the states all agreed that the bulk of the cuts should come from California, California being the 7th one out. But remember, California uses the bulk of it. And you'll remember we said last week, California was one of the last to put restrictions on tapping the aquifer. California, in response, offered its own plan, which unhelpfully suggested that the bulk of the cuts should come from Arizona. So the states couldn't do it. So the Biden administration comes in, and the article that featured last week, the Biden administration just says, hey, we're going to cut evenly your allotment, where nobody's going to have to disproportionately contribute. And if you don't, we're going to unilaterally reduce your water supply. And so this is a crisis John Wesley Powell could not foresee in the 1870s. He came back, you know, and he had a government position in Washington, and he really advocated for using this water to convert the arid West. And it's by and large worked. It's just we've overdone it, and we have this crisis. So the previous rules, legal rules, are based on the most senior rights. This idea that California, which is the most senior of the 7 states, if you go by the old legal precedents, California would have senior water rights and would be spared. And that's the way California has been thinking all along, using this old way of thinking. I think it's based on the riparian river, the river rights of Britain that we just continued, and also known as law of the river. The Spanish had a more communal approach to the use of water, not giving the senior more rights than anybody else. And I recommend this movie, The Milagro Beanfield War. It's Robert Redford directed it. Sonia Braga is in it, which is a nice bonus. But it's about this high pasture valley, and where the Spanish and Mexican peoples have shared the water. You see the canal, they meet, they divide the water evenly, everything's going great. And then an American development company moves in onto land that has senior rights, and they tap off the water, and that's what causes the war. So it's a beautiful illustration of the different legal approaches of the British/American riparian rights, and the more communal view of the Spanish Hispanic countries. So I'm just saying that, and the Nevada and Arizona would be hit the most, and Phoenix and Tucson, their water would be reduced almost to zero. And already you have the outside of Scottsdale that's already in the worst case scenario. The taps have been turned off. So we're in crisis. So who was it at the Department of Interior that decided that we would do this, and the feds would impose a solution if the states couldn't work it out? The Department of the Interior is Deb Haaland, and she's from the Laguna Pueblo people. She's the first Native American in the executive branch. We've had Native Americans in the Senate, in the House, but she's the first one. And I like her nickname here, Badass Woman. And so Badass Woman is saying, look, we're going to evenly distribute the water. Of interest is Arizona and Nevada are both swing states. So, and California is comfortably in the Democrats' pockets. Not that politics would ever play a role here. I don't mean to suggest that. and also they both have critical Senate seats up. And the other wild card here is Native Americans have rights to water by treaty. So that's a little bit different than seniority rights by treaty. So I'll just say another word about her unrelated to water. So she's in charge and she's looking around and she's seeing that there's signs of derogatory names that have been given to public lands, beginning with the word squaw, as she said. There's some indication that squaw was derived for a legitimate Algonquin word, but it's certainly been used offensively. All right. So she's looked around public lands and she's found 650 places that have derogatory names. So she's going to change that. She made that announcement at Alcatraz to mark the 52nd anniversary of its occupation. Many of us were here for. All right.
And John, of course, Squaw Valley is no longer Squaw Valley Ski Area.
What is it?
It's something different, but it's not Squaw. Got changed.
It's called Palisades.
There you go, Palisades. Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So a good example. Thank you. So Jim Teisel and I kind of teamed up. We met a paleontologist, archaeologist, and he is very interested in the Miwoks, and he thinks that we should make Grinding Rock State Park up near Jackson a World Heritage Site. And he feels really keen about this. We met him up in the open space, and he's pretty sure that where I live, right in this valley, there are plenty of places he would love to dig to look for evidence of the Miwoks, but of course he can't. But Grinding Rock State Park would be a great substitute. I don't know if any of you have been there, but they've replicated old Miwok structures, and they have you can camp there. The Miwoks have ceremonies up there occasionally, and as I say, it's a whole campground. So then let me say something about another New York Times op-ed that was published by Bruce Babbitt, and you can see his the headline for his op-ed is this is our one last chance to act. And he knows what he's talking about. He was the former governor of Arizona. He was a state official when Iko and I were on the on the Navajo reservation. He became Clinton's head of the Interior Department, so he had the same job as Deborah Haaland had, and his family was a prominent family in northern Arizona, and his family owned the Tuba Trading Post. They had a lot of Native American trading posts, and they parlayed that into a big department store in Flagstaff. So he became governor soon after we left, and his ranch is between Tuba City and Flagstaff. It's in Cameron, and that is the place where the Little Colorado runs through Cameron before it merges with the Colorado River at the bottom of Grand Canyon. So we talked about that in a previous talk. So he is giving essentially in this op-ed a pep talk to his successor. And he applauds her for her decision to engage with the states. But he says, okay, the time has come. You now must take charge. And it sounds like that's what she's doing if they're going to impose equal distribution solution. But he goes in a little more detail. She's got to review hundreds of contracts about water delivery from Lake Mead and Lake Powell. It's not just a simple thing. And she has to approach these contracts one by one as she's making her calculation. And he points out California is just behaving outrageously. This seniority rule, they're abusing it. That became before we knew about climate change, and that was going to cause really severe droughts. And so he takes California to the task, as well he should. He says, first of all, go for the low-hanging fruit, and that's all the water we talked about last week that goes to, say, almonds, but even worse is the grain for animal field, alfalfa. It takes a ton of water, and so adjusting for our appetite for as carnivores might help a little bit as well. Leonardo DiCaprio, by the way, is leading a call to vegetarianism as much to save water as anything else. Okay, so seniority. And Bruce Babbitt thinks that we can make adjustments and still turn out food. He points out the danger of this getting mired in the legal system. The last time Arizona and California butted heads, that was in 1952. It took the court 11 years to come up with a decision, and we don't have 11 years now. So if California is going to have to reduce their dependence on the Colorado River water by anywhere from 20 to 33%, there's going to have to be some internal fixes. And some of this is going to be familiar, like the peripheral canal. And I want to put that in the context of understanding, for me, a little bit better what that fight of the peripheral canal was all about. Okay, so there's two watersheds, Northern California and Southern California. Northern Sacramento River, pretty straightforward. I want to spend all the time talking about the San Joaquin Basin. Now, we've already talked about the Tulare Basin, but the San Joaquin River is north of that, and the headlands are in the mountains here, and it curves around and avoids is north of the Tulare Basin. So it's flowing north, fed by the gravity of the water coming from the Sierras here. And it comes all the way up into the Delta. And just keeping this curve in mind was helpful to me to understand what's going on with the dynamics. Now, you've seen this map. We've showed it many times. And I understand it a little bit better now. So and the green is the Tulare Basin. We've talked about that. We talked about Salton Sea. We've talked about Tulare Lake. We've talked about Owens Valley. And one thing we haven't talked about is the California Aqueduct, and that's in brown. So the brown you can see at the bottom much easier, and you can see it goes all the way down to the San Diego water system, which is linked to Colorado. But the brown kind of disappears amongst the red and stuff up here. But look where it comes right to Contra Costa County. And so let's take a look at that. That the State Water Project is what built the California Aqueduct, and it provides drinking water to 25 million people. And it's quite complicated. It comes down, it's not like the Sacramento River. Here with the aqueducts, the movement of water becomes pretty complicated. San Luis Reservoir is important, a place to store excess water, and that's was one of the goals of the California Water Project. Store excess water in good years so you can release it in poor years. It's not just drinking water now. It's also a place to deposit extra water in good years. What I appreciate better now is see that it branches into a coastal branch, which it goes all the way down almost to Santa Barbara, and then they've built a canal down to Santa Barbara. Okay, so there's a pumping station here. And then the California Aqueduct, the eastern branch, continues all the way down here. And it has to be pumped over the Tehachapi's. And you can see on this map the Sierras and the Tehachapi's. We learned when we were doing geology, the Tehachapi's are a remnant of the Sierras, that the Sierras came further south, but the Pacific plate, as it moved north, caught the edge of the Sierras and pulled the edge of Sierras, twisted at 90 degrees to form the Tehachapi's. And so you got to get the water over the Tehachapi's. As we've driven down on Highway 5, you see that. So I've blown up a little bit so you can see. I think we've probably all seen the sign to Pyramid Lake, to Castiac Lake, to Silverwood, to the Lake Skinner, Lake Paris. So these are south of Tehachapi's into the Los Angeles River Basin. Now, Los Angeles is getting most of its water from the Owens Valley, but these water systems connect, and that's reassuring if we're going to be dealing with emergencies. So the few names that jumped out at me as I was reviewing this, I've already mentioned St. Louis. Kettleman is quite near where the coastal branch comes off. And then these other power stations, pumping stations are important places in the water system. So Lake Paris, and then there's a further canal down to Lake Skinner. So it's not like the California Aqueduct is just carrying water to the Central Valley. for farmers. No, it's providing drinking water for 25 million people. All right. Now, this is interesting for those of us that live in Contra Costa County. This is where the pumps are. And in eastern Contra Costa County, the Clifton Court forebay is a key point in the California aqueduct system. And it pumps the water south to Southern California. And the other thing it does is help the San Joaquin Valley in a pinch when the San Joaquin Valley isn't providing enough local water. It helps them. And the sobering thing is right here in Contra Costa County, the head, the pumping station here came very close to shutting down in a couple of earthquakes. So we've got to deal with that. This is a Google map, and this is where the pumping plant is. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But here's Altamont, where all the windmills are. Here's Byron, and this is what's powering the California aqueduct. And this is the forebay that collects the water. And I have an illustration of that in just a second. So here are the pumps right here. And important places to generate the flow of water to the south. Now, the problem politically is the salmon and what's the other little fish? The
Snail darter.
yeah,
Smelt.
Yeah, smelt. Yeah, smelt. And this pumping power plant can eat up those things. They have some fish ladders, but they don't always work well. And so the solution for the fish was going to be the peripheral canal. And I'm going to show you how a peripheral canal would restore the natural flow. So, of course, liking maps, I really love this. This is repetitive. You're going to see this about 5 times. So here's the California aqueduct coming south of Tracy. And this is what happens when you pump into the California aqueduct. And so no aqueduct, goes straight through the bay. Aqueduct pulls water south from the San Joaquin and pulls it from the Delta. And you're going to see it again. Pulls it south from the Delta and from the San Joaquin. Doesn't. Here's the Clifton County forebay. Here are the water pumps.
John,
Yeah.
how much of the aqueduct is San Joaquin water, or is any of it Sacramento water?
Yeah, sure. Most of it is Sacramento. And
That's not clear from the,
no, I understand that it's not proportional, but I think it's like a ratio of 4 to 1, 5 to 1.
Yeah. I mean, famously, the San Joaquin River runs dry
yeah,
outside of Fresno in a place called Gravelly Ford because they've taken so much of the water out. So many times there's no effective water coming from several of the branches of San Joaquin River because everything's been dammed.
yeah, yeah. I think I've got yeah. I think here's a slide of that.
Yeah, it's more like 10 to 1.
And so this is the actuality of it, the actual flow. Unimpaired, if you average it out and we weren't sucking so much water out, you'd get an average line that would go somewhere in there. But they're saying that this red line should be at least 30 to 60% of the unimpaired flow for the fish, the salmon and the smelt to survive and thrive. Yeah, so some years you can see it runs dry. In 2015, it was pretty much dry by July.
That also has impacts on the salinity of the whole bay. So there are other concerns besides the salmon and smelt in terms of just the health of the bay and not getting flushed out. And then you get a lot more saltwater intrusion than you would have otherwise.
Yeah, and so the volume of water going through the delta is a little bit different problem, and I'm going to get to the problem with salinity in just a second. There's some interesting history. Before we get to that, other unsustainable aspects of it is we talked about this before. Mainly from depleting the aquifer, the ground is subsiding in the Tulare Basin about a foot a year, and it's affected infrastructure, not just groundwater wells, but also bridges, levees, roads. Canals themselves have interfered with the delivery of water. Another thing to keep in mind is Delta Islands. Some of these islands have been farmed themselves, but even the islands that aren't farmed, some of them are below sea level. So it's like Holland, right? And so the levees that you see when you drive through the Delta, a lot of those were built by Chinese laborers. And it was because some of the land up there was low lying to start with, and reclaimed. But then the problem is that sunk even further. And so this is the problem David's talking about. If all this continues to happen, salt water is going to backflow. I ran across one interesting solution that would certainly help everything, and that's putting solar panels over the canal. So a timeout for a little bit of good news, since we're kind of wallowing in bad news. But putting solar panels is a win-win, right? You get the electricity, and that would replace the diesel that's pumping water now. The systems like this are already in place in a couple of places in India. Very strong agricultural centers, Gujarat and Punjab. So I have a nice long piece to recommend. This guy, he has written, I think, I've read a lot of stuff, but his stuff is the clearest. And it's an article that you can get. It's on something called the California Water Library .net, and I highly recommend it. He's got a good pedigree, books, medals, recognized by environmentalists, and a regular contributor. He makes the point, and I think it's an interesting point, how lucky we are, and we should be grateful that we live in a unique area, perhaps unique on the planet, because it's one of the few deltas that's far from the coast. And it's buffered by the San Francisco Bay. and then only then do you get to the delta. So you have this mix of tidal and freshwater in the estuary, and he thinks that's pretty unique. And so how we manage this, we're kind of writing the rule book on how to manage a situation like this.
Hey, John, I just got to put a plug in for the Bay model. You know, when you're showing that, which is
I'm getting to it.
Okay, Sausalito. All right, fine. You're getting there. Good.
Yeah, I'm getting to it, and it's the very slide I'm on, David. So thanks for the setup.
Okay, it's a fun. I mean, it's free. It's the Corps of Engineers. It's in Sausalito. It's one of my favorite places to take tourists because it really gives you a sense of the whole water system.
Yeah, I've got some slides.
Okay.
It was built to test the theory of the Reber plan. So the Reber plan is kind of hard to see. You can orient a little bit. Here's Angel Island. But the idea was to build a super long dam, if you will, that would block all the fresh water behind it and keep all the salt water on the west side of it. So it was going to, instead of getting a blended estuary, it was going to be a sudden barrier that would separate salt and seawater. So he came up with this plan. I think it was the 1940s. And this is the salinity problem. It's been measured since time immemorial. And in dry years, as you can imagine, you'd have less fresh water coming down. And the encroachment of salinity is terrible. Now, Hart makes the point, he calls it a time, dams are really time machines, reservoirs, where you make deposits in a good year and take them out in a bad year. I think we all know that intuitively, but I like the way he described it. And it was Reber was responding to terrible droughts in the 1930s. So you had enough encroachment of salt water. All you need is 1 part per thousand of chloride, and you can't grow anything. And so this was a way of storing fresh water for these drought years that you could release from behind the dam and flush out the bay. Important for a lot of reasons. There are toxins in the bay, especially these days. So this boundary of infertility went all the way to Stockton, I think, in the 30s. So here's his idea again, and here's the Bay model that David introduced, and Hart calls it wonderful. And I agree. We've taken guests there. We certainly took our boys there, and they built it to test Reber's theory. He lived to see the completion of the model in 1957, but he didn't live to see the results, which is probably a good thing, because the model showed that Reber's plan wouldn't work. So here's where they started, but you could see the enhancements they put in the model. They put in the Golden Gate Bridge. But if Reber had lived to 1962, he would have realized that his idea was impractical. Why? Because of evaporation. And that was going to cause the lakes he was going to construct to actually fall below sea level. So you never know until you test it. But here, different pictures of the model, you can see how big it is. It was really quite ingenious. And here you can see the delta modeled, and people, so you can see how big it was, people, kids, clustered around it. All
So
right.
John, before we get off the Bay model, the building itself was the tool and supply warehouse for Marin ships back in World War II when they were building all the Liberty and Victory ships.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in one corner off to the right of the entrance is a very small museum. And
Yep.
guess who the subject of that museum might be?
Henry Kaiser.
No, it was going to be the Bechtel Company, because that was their shipyard. Kaiser was across the bay in Richmond, but Marin Ships with Bechtel was running that one.
Yeah,
Man, oh
it's a
man.
wonderful place, and it's got to be, I don't know how many acres. Do you know, Bruce? But it's acres of model.
That's a huge building.
Yeah, Bechtel's everywhere. Harold.
So it seems. Yeah.
Yeah, we can't escape it. Thanks. So if Reber wasn't going to work, what else could you do? And the idea of getting more Sacramento River water across the Delta to supplement the San Joaquin, which was running dry, and was suffering the most from salinity. People started talking about ways to get the water from the Sacramento side over to the San Joaquin side. And I guess you could say that all came from Reber. I think many of us were around in 77 for the peripheral canal argument. The one problem with just sucking the Delta and to get at the Sacramento River, to sucking the Delta from the south, is you reverse the water flow in many of the channels, and that confuses the fish. So the idea was to get the water from one side to the other without reversing any flow in the Delta itself. And that was 1997, Proposition 9. It was rejected again and again. And Hart addresses, how's come we keep rejecting these ideas that would be better for the fish, but accomplish the same thing that the pumps do now? Jerry Brown's idea was, okay, if you don't want the canal, how about tunnels? It was 2 tunnels to start with. And then only about 60% of the peripheral canal. People didn't like it, so it came back again in 2017, rechristened a different name, emphasizing saving the fish, Eco Restore. And then 2018, water districts decided they didn't like it. The only water district that liked it a lot was the Metropolitan Water District, and that's for the metropolitan Southern California. Newsom came up with a single tunnel, and they all died in controversy. And Hart thinks it's a fear, a real fear, that if they find an engineering solution, that it would make it easier for Southern California to grab even more water. And so it's just it's not a rational decision that has influenced voters. But we may be at a point in history where we can't let fears interfere with public policy if Phoenix is going to run out of water. So there is a new scaled down proposal, not even a year old yet. And we'll see if that gets anywhere. But with the current crisis and the federal action that's being taken, maybe it will, and we'll finally find a way to help out the salmon. And they're being monitored. That's one good thing about environmentalists and public policy. It is being monitored, and this is the question: how can we get in northern water in wet years stored and sent to the south without damaging the fish? That's the key question. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second and catch my breath. I do want to. We started a little bit late. How much time do I have?
-2 minutes.
-2 minutes. Well, I'll mention Cabrillo so I can say in my announcement that we made it to Spain. Let me do 2 slides and then I'll throw it open to discussion. So Cabrillo in his early days, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how he was probably born in Portugal, but he sailed under the Spanish flag to Cuba, where he served and acquitted himself well, and the Spanish governor got together a party when this guy Cortez went rogue. Cortez was planning to go to Mexico, and the governor was on board, and Cortez had outfitted his ships, but the governor changed his mind, and then Cortez went anyway. The governor sent this guy, Narvaez, to get him down. It was a posse, if you will, sent ships to arrest Cabrillo, bring him back and put him on a trial. And Narvaez found Cortez in Veracruz. And so that's where Cabrillo, as one of Narvaez's men, will first encounter Cortez in Veracruz. But what I think is interesting is how Cortez got to Veracruz. Now, David, you gave me a segue. You sent me this map. It's of the New World with a lot of lines. Let me blow one of them up. So this is the top part of the map that David sent me. And it shows Cortez going from Cuba, fleeing from Cuba against the governor's orders in 1519. Well, it's more interesting than that. It's more interesting. And the story really starts in 1511 with a shipwreck of a ship that the survivors eventually floated to the Yucatan, to Cozumel. It's called the Valdivia shipwreck in 1511. Here they are in Cozumel. They wash ashore in Cozumel. Here, shipwreck survivors laying on the beach. The Mayans come. Many of the sailors, Spanish sailors, run away. all of them die except for two. The priest, the guy named Geronimo Aguilar, and the soldier, Gonzalo Guerrero. Gonzalo Guerrero takes a Mayan wife, fathers the first mestizo. This is a statue that we saw walking on the beach in Acomel. I think it had to be 30 years ago. And it was labeled the first mestizo, a Spanish shipwreck guy who married a Mayan. And he made it into Mayan culture and comic books. His story is well known. Now enter Cortez. Cortez goes to Cozumel in 1519, and he finds, this is 8 years later, he finds, he's rogue, he's an outlaw, and he finds these survivors of a shipwreck who one is the priest who has maintained his religion and stayed Spanish, and the other soldier who's gone native. And this is where I want to continue the story next week, because it's really fascinating. And so how's that for a segue?
I thought we already did this.
Some of you've heard it. Some of you've heard it, but there's enough new people here that haven't heard this story. Okay, comments on water or thanks for letting me get to at least a few sides of Cabrillo before you abandoned ship. That way I can say we started.
So we recently took a trip out to the Morgan Territories. There's James Benny that leads a tour out there, and with all of the mortar sites, and showing all the villages, and that used to be really a gathering site. We also then just the last few days traveled around we took a trip to Lodi, and then actually did all of the Delta and some of the little cities there, the Chinese with the story there with the building the levees and
Locke.
Pardon me?
Locke.
In Locke, and also in Isleton. There's as many Chinese living in Isleton as there were in Locke.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and fascinating to see all of that, and it was good to see today where the Consumnes River was, and that's been apparently the only river that doesn't have any dams on it at all. It's totally from the Sierras down into the Delta.
Uh-huh.
And then we also went to Brushy Peak, which is down and then that was then the entrance into Morgan Territory, and going back up into to see all of those the mortar sites. It's a fascinating area. That was the Volvan tribes, and versus the Sakhalin, but they were all the Bay Miwoks.
Yeah. So yeah, that part of the county is interesting. There's some old archaeological digs out there where they showed many graves with two heads and one body. We've talked about that earlier. The other interesting thing out there is John Marsh put up a mansion out there. The John Marsh story is amazing. So we'll get to that with in 1820 and Mexican California, the first real American in Contra Costa County, who offered himself as a doctor, but he never went to medical school. That's another story. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there, but the oldest is the Vasco Caves. And I know we've talked about this, and some of you've been there, I think. Who was it? Was it Bob? Yeah, Bob Ox. Yeah. Very, very interesting part. And now we know that's where the pumps are for the California aqueduct.
One other question I had with the, when you're talking about the water rights and how the difference between the English ones and the American ones, and of course, what's left out of that picture is the native rights, is the fact that they didn't, I mean, it was a communal. So when you talk about a communal thing about where water comes from and who can use what, and what streams or springs are available and that kind of thing, they had no idea what, who owns what water rights.
Well,
you can buy them.
Yeah, it's in the treaties though that we have. So that with them, they do have some water rights, and they do have free medical care, which is why Aiko and I were there. That's guaranteed. It's much more valuable these days than it was then. Maybe, I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure about that. But take a look at the Milagro bean field.
Yeah, that's good.
It's a very sweet movie, and it illustrates a key legal point on riparian rights.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
I've missed a couple of weeks, but I keep getting hung up on why California doesn't do more to fill the aquifer. I know that there's a problem with going through settling the pesticides and whatnot, but I would think that the main focus would be on refilling or replenishing the aquifer.
So do you have you have the link to the previous weeks, right?
Yes, and I've watched a couple of them.
Yeah, well, look at the one last week or the week before, talking about the work being done at Stanford, the work being done by
Great.
A farmer named Cameron, who's on the Kings River, which is just south of the San Joaquin. I didn't know where the Kings River was, but it's in just barely in the Tulare Basin. So it's south of where the San Joaquin makes that steep bend to the north, coming down from the mountains. So there's some interesting stuff going on there about replenishing. And this recent flooding, there's activity, it's in law now, that farmers who leave their fields flooded and allow the water to seep down into the water table, get some kind of compensation. I don't know the details. So there's a lot of activity. At Stanford, you have some women that are measuring the resistance of the top 100 meters of ground to electromagnetic impulses, and figuring out where the best place would be to drill a hole and avoid clay and find gravel, where you could build collector basins. There is a farmer we talked about who has built some collecting basins. Now, the point's been made that it's such a massive problem, and all these are little band-aids, but maybe together and building on, there would be some rational steps we could take to recharge the aquifer in positive years, just like there is building dams to capture the excess. But the problem with the dams is the evaporation, right? And that's why-
Absolutely.
That's why the Reber plan failed. It was the evaporation, which maybe you put solar panels across the whole reservoir. I don't know.
The problem, one of the big problems would be just in the consolidation. I mean, once you soils settle and consolidate, then you can't just go back and fluff them up again.
Yeah, we've inherited a problem of our own making.
Yes, what is it in the Central Valley? What is it in the San Jose area? It's gone down, what, 20 or 20 feet, hasn't it, or something like that? Maybe not that.
Yeah, on the valley. You're also dealing with 1,000,000 years of build up with 100 years of drawdown. So it's, the ratio is tough to catch up on.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for.
All right,
sticking
thank
around
you.
for,
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
A very enjoyable conversation.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah. take-
Later.
Okay.